Welcome to Ageless. So, the best part about having your own show is that you can talk about whatever you would normally talk about with your girlfriends. And so, today, grab a glass of wine, get comfortable. We're going to talk about sex. Now, we're going to talk about sex in midlife when many people are finding real intimacy difficult to come by. According to recent studies, about 73% of women between 48 and 68 are still sexually active, but that number decreases with age, according to Harvard Medical School, as about 50% of them, 50%, are experiencing some type of sexual dysfunction. Some of this is physical. Typically, a woman's libido decreases in menopause with a decrease in estrogen, and the physical changes can lead to painful intercourse. Much of this can be addressed with hormone treatments. We covered that in another show, but there's another layer to this. Barriers to sex and intimacy can also be emotional. So that's what we're going to focus on today because there's a lot of scientific evidence that having real intimacy in our lives is critical to our emotional and physical well-being. So I'm so fortunate to have one of my oldest friends here today. Bella Brooks is going to talk about her journey to becoming a certified sex coach and sexologist and exactly what that means. I'm going to quote from her website. She says she is bringing mindfulness to connection, intimacy, and pleasure, helping you to improve your sexual confidence and communication skills. And she says, let's redefine relationships and sexuality on your terms. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
I'm really happy for you to be here too, because I've known you for, gosh, I don't even know how many years now, over 30. More
Yeah,
than that. More
it's
than that.
91,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
34.
A little bit over 30 years. We met in Portland, Maine, and we were both volunteering at the local rape crisis center. And I think it was 34 years ago. And so I've loved watching you and as a mom, as a professional woman, as a friend, just evolve over these years. And so this is really a new exciting chapter for you. Tell me a little bit about your background because obviously you didn't just come to this. You have done many other things in your career. Talk about that a little.
Well, so I think, I've been in business. I went and I got an MBA in marketing. I have a really great job with a great biotech company. And when my youngest daughter was starting her senior year of high school, I just asked myself, what do I really want to do? Like, is this where I'm going to be for the next 10 years until I punch out and I collect Social Security or whatever? And then I did some investigation about what I was passionate about. And you said it. It's like women talking about sex with their girlfriends, talking about relationships, talking about challenges. And then I found out about the Sex Coach U, which is a school that was founded by Dr. Patty Britton. And I did an online certification class that took me 2 years. And it's asynchronous, so I could do it while I was working and I could dedicate time for my children. And I finished that off in this past summer. And what's so interesting is that it brought me all the way back to my roots because in college I studied anthropology and sociology and women's studies. And here I am. I took a 25-year detour in business and now I'm back to what I'm really passionate about. Like it's like those little things that you don't really give that much thought to, but those early passions, they really pan out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we sow a seed, if you will, of something that we're like, I might just file that away and get back to it. And
Mhm.
so you come full circle. I know you call yourself a love coach, and I love that title. That is such a great title. And, we're around the same age. So I think we grew up seeing certain things modeled in our homes and communities around sexuality. And a lot of it was based on let's not talk about it in the
Right.
70s and 80s. So we didn't have role models, I don't think, in our families that were sharing that. Is that your experience?
It is. My parents were immigrants. And so while there wasn't ever any shame and there was no guilt, I didn't have any negativity that I absorbed. Excuse me. I definitely kind of figured it out on my own. And I have two daughters that are, 20 and 22 now. And ever since they were teenagers, I was very, very pro positive, very sex positive, very like, you can talk to me about whatever, like there's no shame. I gave them vibrators for, gifts because it's like, it's all about pleasure. And I just want to be as pleasure positive as I can possibly be.
So tell me about this training because you said it was 2 years. That's a very long time. I know you were doing it while you were also raising your daughters and working, but
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you delved into in that training?
So it was about, give or take maybe 600 hours of time where there were books to read, there were lectures to watch, there were guest speakers. I found it really exciting to have read a book and then listened to a live webinar by the author. So they did a really nice job of curating content and presenting a lot of information about sexual attitudes, about normalizing sexual behavior. I think the biggest thing about coaching is that it's non-pathologizing, right? So it's not really about dysfunction. Like there's no diagnosis. Like when you're coaching someone for sexuality challenges or concerns, it's really about getting to the root of where their inhibitions are or what their patterns of behavior have been. And a lot of that, like we talked about, is, well, what was modeled for you? What were the messages you experienced when you were growing up? And then normalizing it. Like this is okay. Like everything you're experiencing, it's part of the human experience. And so that's a lot of the work that I experienced in the coaching program, is getting comfortable. They were very specific about, what are the top 10 challenges that women experience? What are the top 10 challenges that men experience? And the same thing for couples. So it was very detailed around, these are the ways that people struggle with their sexuality. And these are some of the approaches that you can help people to move through them.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that it's so detailed that the training is. And, I'm sure every person is different. Everybody you work with is different, right? But you've got to break the ice. These are difficult topics. But when you get a new client, how do you begin that process of helping them feel comfortable with sharing their concerns?
So I always start with a discovery call. So we have a free 15 or 20-minute call to see if we're aligned, where I ask them to share with me some of their concerns or some of their questions, or typically it's, tell me about an area that you're looking for growth, or how do you want to be a different version of yourself when it comes to your sexuality. So we will talk, and again, I'm establishing rapport and normalizing for them what they're experiencing. And then once we agree we're going to move forward, I have an intake form that's pretty detailed, and it asks them to think back to their childhood and to detail what was going on for them as they became a sexual person. So what were the messages and the modeling that they experienced, 8, 9, 10, what was happening when they were starting to enter puberty? Tell me about some of your early sexual experiences. So it's a really vulnerable experience for them to open up and share that, but it's just so rich. It's such a tapestry of information to see what was happening as a human, basically, goes through this giant metamorphosis, and, from a child to an adolescent to prepubescent and then to a sexual person. So there's a lot of intimacy building that we experience through that process.
And I mean, that requires so much courage. And I'm sure part of that too, maybe looking back at trauma, maybe
Yeah.
looking back at sexual assault or, child molestation or, things that were negatively impacted their view of sexuality.
Well, and for sure, I'm not, licensed to really address trauma. So as a coach, again, we're working on, the future version of yourself. We're not going to spend a lot of time archiving the past and healing trauma. I have a referral network for those kinds of clients who haven't addressed their previous trauma, but if they have and they're really motivated to move forward, then I would say that it's a good fit.
Gotcha. So I know you said you work with individuals and you work with couples. How does that differ? Because obviously you're going to be having different conversations when you have two people versus one.
For sure. And typically when I'm working with couples, I start off with a combined session with both of them together. And then I do 2 individual sessions with each of them so that we can really get into their own set of whatever their challenges are, whatever their backstory is. If there's information that they haven't actually shared with their partner, then I help encourage them to bring it to light, because I'm not going to necessarily be effective if one person's harboring a secret. And then we come back together for, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the sixth session. And then from there, we can plan a course to continue working together based upon what we've uncovered.
And I know, there's such an important distinction, right, between intimacy and intercourse, because there are so
Yeah.
many things that are intimate. Holding hands, that's intimate. Cuddling is intimate. Kissing
Mhm,
is intimate.
mhm.
How do you get people to understand that it's not all about the sex act, that it's about so many other things?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up because in our society, we are hyper focused on the one thing, right? The one thing that is penetrative sex. And in the universe of love and connection and intimacy, it's so much beyond that, right? Especially as we age, because as you mentioned, our bodies age and erections are not always predictable, and we experience pain upon penetration at times. And so, a lot of the work I do is to help people reframe like sex is not just about penetration, right? It's intimate connection, intimacy, and pleasure is the new model where I think we've all been raised, and in movies and around us, we're thinking about erection, penetration, ejaculation, right? Like that's the social model that the patriarchy would like to kind of maintain. And the work that I'm doing is, we can redefine what pleasure is all about. And for most women, it's not just about that one thing, right? There's just so much more.
Absolutely. I think I want to get into the barriers now because women in midlife, as we've talked about, they've got some barriers. They may have pain because they may be dealing with some physical issues. They may be with a man that is having, some problems in terms of, being able to get an erection, as you talked about. So, how do we kind of work through this stuff in midlife?
Well, there are lots of options. And for me, as part of my practice, my personal practice in my dating life, and also as far as what I encourage my clients to do, is really focus on building a connection. And that connection is based upon shared experiences. So, where are the ways that your lives overlap? Are you, as Esther Perel would talk about, like, where is their discovery? Where is their newness and novelty? What are you doing with your partner that sparks joy? Like, are you bringing excitement back to your relationship? And then thinking about, like, how do you cultivate intimacy? And so there are different kinds of practices around gazing. You can sit with your partner and you can create kind of a quiet space and do some eye gazing and breathe together and do some nervous system co-regulation. There are exercises around standing and hugging, which are just so powerful because, again, it's like we're not going to have sex. It's not going anywhere. We're just practicing connection and we're practicing intimacy. You come together and you bring your heart space close to each other and you breathe together. So my model is really based upon redefining, like, we're not going to be having sex in 2 weeks. Like, just so you know, like, if you have been in a sexless marriage for months or years, there are baby steps to establishing a foundation for connection and intimacy that then serves as a place where you can move forward.
Yeah, because when you think about it, like you mentioned, a long marriage, a long relationship, resentments build up, right?
Mhm.
There are water under the bridge things that are still filed for you in the back of your mind, right? And
Totally.
so you have to somehow transcend those and maybe even recreate intimacy or create new intimacy in order to be able to redefine your sex life.
Well, and another big piece of that is just communication, right? So a lot of what I work on are communication skills that are based upon me and I statements. Just the other night, I was talking with a friend of mine who was describing how his other relationships in the past, he didn't like the quality of the touch. Like, they were kind of scratchy and they were kind of rough. And I said, well, why was it that you never said anything? And he said, well, I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And so here he is settling for an unpleasant experience because he doesn't want to hurt their feelings because he's afraid of speaking his truth. So I spent a lot of time helping people find their voice and find kind and compassionate ways to say, what I really would like is if you did this, or it would really feel good to me if you tried this other thing, right? So it's not about hurting feelings, but it's really more about finding your voice and speaking up for what would be more pleasurable for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know there's not a one size fits all, but are there some top tips that you start with that you want to share with people in terms of, how to get back on track?
Well, I do really think that cultivating intimacy is the most important thing. And there are exercises to do that. I think finding ways to be together in intimate space where you take sex off the table, right? So like I have a coaching client who came to me because he wanted, more sex with his wife. And they had kind of gotten to a place where they were just cohabitating and they were sleeping in separate bedrooms. So I started to encourage them to just spend time together, like on the bed, and just talk and like just caress each other and just build connection and build intimacy and experience pleasure without any expectation. So I think that's the most important thing, is find the safe space to experience pleasure and know that it's not going anywhere, right? Because I think, for men who have difficulty sustaining erections, and for women who are not sure if they're going to be aroused enough, if they're uncomfortable with penetration, like there's a lot of fear,
A
and
lot
there's
of
a lot of,
pressure too,
and a lot
right?
of pressure, totally. And so like creating space to just like be and to practice, right, is one of the best ways to just move closer to one another, so that you're remembering what it was like, yeah, there is passion here, right? But we've had these obstacles, we've had these arguments, we've had this fear. And so like I think that's one of the best things to do, is like just take sex off the table, right? And just practice intimacy. And when I say sex, like take penetration off the table, right? But there's so many other things you can do with showing your partner the ways that you like to be touched, right? You can have exercises that demonstrate, practice giving and receiving pleasurable touch. That's one of the really nice ways to reconnect.
Yeah, and I think there's probably, if there have been problems with sex in the past, there's a fear of failure and there's a
Totally.
fear of rejection. And
Yeah.
so if
Oh,
you
yeah.
can, like you said, if you can get that off the table and not go there immediately, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm so intrigued is something else you're working on now is the cuddling. So tell me about that. You're doing some special training. Tell me what that involves.
So I've recently been certified as a cuddleist, which is someone who provides platonic cuddle therapy. And what that entails is effectively an agreement to create a safe space for the client to ask for the kind of touch that they want to receive, and for them to practice speaking their truth. And for me to hold the safety and the integrity of that space, knowing that either one of us, if we become uncomfortable physically or emotionally in whatever we're doing, we're going to speak up and share our thoughts, and then we can reposition. So the platonic cuddle therapy is an amazing way to generate oxytocin, right? Of course, because like humans, we crave touch and we crave connection. And you think about the last time you had like a really good hug from someone, like you just
Mm-hmm.
kind of sink and you settle and it's just like cozy. So that's one of the reasons that we cuddle, is because it feels good. But the other reason, and the most important reason, is that you're practicing consent and you're practicing speaking your boundaries, in terms of, this is the kind of touch I want. So the client basically leads the entire engagement. And it might be that you just start by holding hands, or they might ask for a shoulder massage, or they might want to lay with their head in your lap on a pillow. And you're practicing asking, like, is it okay if I touch your head? Is it okay if I rub your arm? And they're speaking about what kind of touch they want. So they're experiencing a sense of empowerment and also a sense of safety, knowing that I'm not going to violate any of their boundaries, and they're free to change their mind and say, well, I think I want to do something else now.
And you learned about this or you got involved in this at a recent festival in Connecticut. So tell me about that.
Oh, well, so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. I actually, so separate from the cuddle therapy, which is one on one, I have been attending the East Coast Tantra Festival, which takes place in Western Massachusetts.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that's a group of people who come together for authentic relating and for different kinds of mindful listening exercises to build connection and to build intimacy and to learn to speak their truth. And from that group, I developed a couple of really close friends. And one of the women had her 60th birthday party. So she invited me to come and to host a cuddle party.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so
Okay. Tell me about
maybe,
that.
yeah, exactly. So maybe you've heard the term like cuddle puddle. And so this is a group of people who come together, and you're not going to be cuddling strangers. It's more about what I described, where maybe it's like 10 or 12 people. I think there might have been 12 people at this group, and you start off with some really gentle exercises around sharing something about yourself. So you're listening mindfully, you're maintaining eye contact, you're not responding to anything they say. It could be a prompt as simple as, tell me something you love about yourself. And the person will speak for a minute or two, and then you thank them, and then you switch. So you're developing a connection and you're sharing something vulnerable about yourself, and you're establishing intimacy. And then you switch partners, and then there's a different question. And then you switch partners again, and there's another question. So over the course of, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, you've partnered with a few different people and you've gotten to know something really pretty intimate about them. And then from that, you move into some consent exercises where you practice partnering up and asking to give or receive touch. And the first round, everything that you're asking for is met with a no. And it's a beautiful experience to feel in your body, like, what is it like to say no to something that I might want, or to feel the relief of saying no to something that I don't want. And for every no, you're met with the same answer, which is thank you for taking care of yourself. So you're practicing finding your voice and establishing your boundary. And then from, oh,
No, no, I'm fascinated by this. Go
It's
on, go on.
yeah, it's so beautiful. And then from the no, then you move to no but, which is somebody might say, can I give you a back massage? And you say no, but you can rub my shoulders. So again, you're finding your voice, you're feeling into your body, and you're getting quiet enough to really listen to what that answer is. And my favorite part is then you move to yes, and you're still not going to do anything. You're not going to actually act out. But this is where like you're really dialed in. Like somebody says, can I stick my tongue in your ear? And you're like, yes, right? Like it's clearly a no. And so the point of the whole exercise is that if you're a maybe, that's a no. Like you want to find your authentic yes. And then from that point, after you do these different consent exercises with different people, then you can move into actually asking for and receiving touch.
I read an article the other day, I think it was in the New York Times, that said we need 10 hugs a day to really be emotionally secure and happy. And that's a lot of hugs, if you're not living with a partner or you're not living with your children and you're not seeing friends on a regular basis that you're hugging. So I do think there's something really important about that kind of touch. So, what would you say to people who are out there who are listening and who are just like, I don't even know where to begin with all of this? Like, I know I need help in this area, but I don't even know how to start, because
Hmm.
it's pretty intimidating.
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, there are different books, there are different, I'm sorry, can you hear my cat meowing in the background?
It's
I
okay.
hear him at the door and he's a little distracting to me. I'm
Don't
glad that
worry
he's
about
not
it. I
meowing
mean,
on camera.
I guess my question is because, it is so hard to begin. And obviously, I mean, you're on my show. People can contact you. That's a great option for them, right? Um, and there are probably lots of people in throughout the country that do this. But I think it's like taking that first step with
Right.
something this challenging is a
It's
big deal.
intimate and it's scary, right? And what's interesting I find is that it's a lot easier to establish intimacy with a stranger than it is with someone you know, right? Because intimacy is scary because of our primal fear of abandonment and fear of rejection or fear of ridicule. So, and up here in Portland, there's lots of really cool different communities, And so I would suggest to people to look into their own local community to see what's available. There's, even, there's a lot of overlap between like yoga and meditation and ecstatic dance. And, I'm trying to think about the populations of people where like those circles overlap. Like, who are the kind of people that come to the Tantra Festival? They're curious and they're interested in bettering their situation. Like, that's, I think, the first place to start is just the awareness. Like, like I'm feeling like something is missing. I'm feeling like I'm out of touch with your sexuality, right? I mean, Dr. Patty Britton, she founded this school because women have lost their connection to pleasure, right? We've kind of surrendered it to men in terms of, well, my husband can give me pleasure, right? And that's not necessarily always the right answer. I think that there are lots of ways for women to learn how to take back their empowerment, right? Like, find the divine feminine within, find their inner goddess, and let that be something that guides you towards like how you want to show up differently in your life.
And do you think that it's that we've never been more isolated than we are before for some reason? You would think the internet has created this world of connection, but in a way, I feel like people may be more isolated and more lonely because they're not actually seeking the personal connection. They're like, well, I've got it all right here on my computer. I don't need to go anywhere.
Yeah, and streaming TV. I mean, that's like kind of another thing that it's really easy to fall into a routine where you've got your shows and you've got your comfort. And COVID was no help because people were just afraid to leave the house and afraid to make real connections. Even just going out, like I love to go see music, like live music, like go to dance at concerts. And one of the things I notice is I look for who's open for eye contact, right? As you're like walking by, like who's looking, who's smiling, like how do you engage with a random person? Just like a gentle acknowledgement, like, hey, I see you, right? Like that's an easy exercise to practice like on your own and see what happens. Like how many people are like looking down, looking at their phones, completely oblivious, and who's actually like into the scene. They're connected, they're dialed in, and they're open to engaging with the
They're
people around
aware.
them.
Yeah.
They're aware. Yeah.
Okay, so before I get your information about how people can follow you, is there anything else that I missed in our conversation?
Hmm. Well, I think we've had a really good random evolution of my notes because the fear of intimacy is, I think, a really big issue, and that people kind of, what we talked about was like people are doing sex wrong, right? Like that's my experience, is that we've been hyper fixated on penetration. Viagra is a perfect example of that. Like it's addressing the male issue around, penetration, right? And we really haven't gotten to the heart of, what happens to a woman if you spend 30 minutes or an hour just connecting and massaging and stroking and raising energy, right? Like raising your sexual energy, your erotic energy. Like you don't really need to have penetration to have a really beautiful, pleasurable sexual experience.
That's pretty good advice. So, how can people follow you?
So I have a new website that I launched. It's bellabrookslovecoach.com. And I'm going to be providing a piece of content that I'm working on finalizing, which is called Cultivating Intimacy in Your Romantic Relationships. And it goes through some of the exercises that we talked about around gazing and hugging and building erotic energy, but not necessarily moving towards penetration, right? Like we're going to reframe the conversation and we're going to see how much fun you can have without having this destination, like you said, like this goal-oriented, this expectation, is he hard enough? Am I wet enough? Are we getting to that point? Whereas I think we can just do ourselves a big favor and change our attitude about sex and pleasure.
That sounds like some very, very good advice. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so great, again, to watch your evolution and to hear all your advice. I know that my listeners are going to eat this up. I know they're going to love it because this is just something we all talk about, right? With our girlfriends. We should be talking about it openly. publicly.
With our boyfriends, with our husbands, with our partners, right? We want to
Absolutely.
bring it out of the closet and get very clear about asking for what we want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Amanda. It was awesome to be with you tonight.
Ta-da!